Hi there, this is a special holiday edition of Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane, and today we are counting down the top 5 newsmakers that dominated Canadian politics in 2025. Who drove the biggest stories and stirred up the most political drama? Power and Politics starts right now. We've got a special Power panel here to look back at who dominated this year's news cycle. In our Ottawa studio, we've got Tim Powers, who has worked as a strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. Laura D'Angelo was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Charelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. Good to see you all. Let's get right into it. Ranking at number 5 on our top Canadian political newsmakers for 2025.
We don't have to take a backseat to anyone, and we sure the heck don't have to take a backseat to Donald Trump.
I don't trust President Trump as far as I can throw.
We need a mandate from the people to fight against Donald Trump's tariffs.
I'm going to protect the people of Ontario. I'm going to protect your families, your jobs, your community.
The powers and trust posed in me as Premier.
When I was born, folks, the doctor came along and stamped a C on my forehead.
I described him today as Santa Claus. He's coming, and his sled was full.
I'm not jumping into that bear trap. Oh, the cheese slipped off the cracker, I get it. Elbows up, fists up.
Tariff by tariff, dollar for dollar.
This is what I think about Crown Royal. That's what they could do. Sorry, I just get pumped up talking about this guy.
Heard that the president heard our ad. I'm sure he wasn't too happy. The message was very clear. Protectionism does not work. Wasn't this, he'd pick something else that he wasn't happy with. I'm going to do everything we can to protect Ontario.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford kicks off our list of the top 5 newsmakers in 2025. Tim, Doug Ford had a heck of a year, 3 straight majority governments, pouring out liquor, and he's the Don Draper of the Premier's table, running ads that you can't help but notice.
You can't help but notice that. Yeah, he would have been great on Mad Men. Look, I think winning 3 elections is something anybody could admire. Justin Trudeau did that, of course, too. I think the key thing about Doug Ford this year, he demonstrated that he is the big dog, if you will, at the Premier's table. He has been shaping the national agenda from that table and causing a little bit of friction. His relationship with Mark Carney, I think, has been good for Canada for the most part as we deal with Donald Trump. I would say there's lessons for other politicians to take from Doug Ford, not so much about drowning Crown Royal bottles, though if you need to do that, you go for it. But it's more a case of his political versatility. When he makes a mistake, he says sorry. When he makes a bad decision, he steps back. Hey, other premiers, Conservative or maybe national leaders, have a look at what he does.
Yeah, Jordan, he's kind of the hokey-pokey Premier, right? Puts his foot in, takes it out, puts it back. You know, he will reverse on policies if he needs to, but it leads to a durability and a longevity as a political leader.
Yes, he's also probably the top consumer of cheese and cracker analogies in the country.
It's a euphemistic guy.
I assume it's Canadian dairy, so it's probably for the best. Yeah, I think, Doug Ford's, he's really a remarkable political player in his longevity and his ability that we saw this year in spades when he made the decision to call an early election to overcome what are actually some pretty fundamental weaknesses in terms of public opinion in Ontario about him. So a lot of people in Ontario are very unhappy about things like the cost of living, about housing, about wait times in hospitals, family doctors. And none of that really seems to have put a dent in his top line numbers. And I think in large part that's because he is so flexible, he is so versatile, and he's a type of populist who's less ideological and more stylistically interested in staying connected to where regular people are at. And that has given him the elbow room to recover from mistakes and to come back from some of those things that would have been far more damaging for other politicians.
Yeah, and Laura, he handed off the chairmanship of the Council of the Federation to the constantly rotating premiership of Prince Edward Island in this current context, but he was there at a particular moment in time and seized the stage with it.
He was, and what it really did for him was take what Ontarians have gotten used to, this Teflon premier, as Jordan and Tim are outlining, and put him on a national stage at this particular moment in time. It's hard enough for a premier to become a national household name at any given moment in time, but what Doug Ford did this year was make sure that he is the longevity nationally in the history books that students will study that most premiers don't. And it is remarkable when you think about some of the scandals over the past 10 years that he's had. He truly is Teflon. He's going to sit in the legislature for 53 days next year And Ontarians are fine with that because this persona that he puts out is so every Canadian. It's something that really does just bounce off the ground whenever he falls.
Right, but you know, Charelle, there are growing police investigations into various activities of various departments of government, the Greenbelt, the jobs program. It is not always in the headlines for all the right reasons either, right?
No, he's not. But that's the thing that's kind of so remarkable about Doug Ford, because everybody looks at these things that happen. He looks at them, the things that happen, and he goes, oh, somebody should look into this and somebody should get to the bottom of this. And I can't, you know, somebody should be held accountable for all these things that are happening under my watch. You know, he's Captain Canada. He's, you know, the big mayor. He's constantly in meddling in municipal affairs. He's doing kind of everything except the job that he was purportedly elected to do when it comes to running the province. And because he's been you know, avoiding that to a degree. You know, he's not sitting. He has a kind of a majority in the legislature that Mark Carney could only, you know, envy. So he's able to, at least when it comes to legislation and things like that, get things through very quickly, avoid scrutiny, and just move on onto things that he wants to be doing and it is garnering him this national attention.
Yeah, he had a busy year. Maybe that's why he's not opening Queen's Park until like March. And as Laura said, going to sit for 53 days. Okay, Doug Ford was number 5 on our list. Let's get on to the number 4 political newsmaker of the year.
They want this lady and Alberta to just sit down and shut up.
Trying a tit-for-tat tariff war without addressing the underlying issues, it's not going to go well for Canada.
Until our U.S. friends come back to reality, we will focus on efforts and financial means to export one of the largest oil and gas deposits in the world. My personal position is I believe in Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada.
These Albertans are not traitors, nor should they ever be treated as such. They just love their province and family and want a better future than the one Ottawa is offering them right now.
We have to decide if we're going to operate like a country and trade with each other. I think Premier Bree's comments are un-Canadian and they're unconstitutional.
The government of Alberta will be the proponent of an oil pipeline to the Northwest BC coast.
I think it's going to unleash an incredible amount of investment and allow us to work together. We're going to work very, very hard to get a project on the major projects list so we can attract a private proponent. I think it's a clear win. It's a clear win.
Another provincial leader cracks the list. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith ranks as the 4th top political newsmaker of 2025. Charelle, it is interesting that in 2024 it was all about Danielle Smith fighting with the federal government. 2025, she's working with the federal government on the pipeline in particular.
For now. I mean, we'll see what 2026 actually holds. But I mean, there was always going to be that tension. Ottawa is always going to be the scapegoat for Alberta. We're seeing it still with some of the things that she's done, even in the wake of signing that MOU with the Prime Minister try to get that pipeline across through BC. Whether it's, you know, talking about federally appointed judges wanting to use the notwithstanding clause, separation. All of these things are still going to be things that she can drive a wedge between Alberta and the federal government, even as they purport to work together. Because as we saw, it didn't exactly go over super well with her base. No. You know, she was still booed essentially when it came down to, you know, talking about, oh, you know, isn't this showing that everybody's working together? No, that's not what they want. They want the fight.
Yeah, Tim, it's remarkable that, you know, Alberta often leads the country in GDP per capita, and she leads the premiers in news per capita, potentially, because whether it's like culture war issues, the separatism issues that are emerging there, the economic fights, the environmental fights, the notwithstanding clause, there is a constant churn of activity coming out of the premier's office in Alberta.
And a lot of that is about maintaining the support of that base that ironically has recalled her now, which I think is only the 2nd time in Alberta history a premier has been subject to some form of recall. But she's moved from fringe on the national stage to front and center in terms of cooperation. She and Mark Carney may have done something that nobody would have ever anticipated, that together Canada and Alberta, whether we ever see a pipeline or not, and that's a whole other debate, have come together to potentially build one. It's a fascinating moment of national unity, which she is paying for within her own party. But to have the gumption to move forward to do that is admirable. That's almost Peter Lougheed-esque, and she would never want to be compared to Peter Lougheed. But that is the time in which we live, where the unexpected and the extraordinary are on the table.
Well, unexpected and extraordinary, Laura, to the point that Stephen Guilbeault quit over this deal, right? Like, she has campaigned for years to get him out of politics, and by signing a deal with his boss, she may have accomplished that particular goal. It's just the level of influence she's having right now is pretty outsized.
It's remarkable, the level of influence that Danielle Smith has. And one of the things that's so striking to me is she has taken what is largely a fringe movement in Alberta, the separatist movement, and weaponized it, frankly, to drive the national agenda, right? She's using it super effectively to not force, but influence politicians nationwide, and particularly federally, to try to keep the country together. And it's pretty remarkable. You can't talk about Danielle Smith without talking about her communications strengths, which you started to outline, and this is one of them, right? She takes things that most premiers, most politicians would shy away from talking about and tries to normalize it, right? She manages to kind of find a way to smooth it over that when you take a step back, you question, but in the moment sounds so good, and it's allowed her to drive towards an MOU with the federal government.
Yeah, I've interviewed her many times, Jordan, and there are times she's speaking to you in this calm, normal voice, and you'll go, wait, what? You know, because she'll say something, it's like, what did you just say, Premier? But, you know, she has this base, and she's like kind of riding this tiger, trying to keep it together and advance the economic interests of the province. And it's that is one of the toughest jobs in Canadian politics, I think.
Absolutely. And I think you can say that talk radio is a very good training ground for politicians. And she really does have remarkable speaking and presentation skills. And I think it carries her very far. And you know, she started the year, I think, in a much more uncertain place. If you remember at the beginning when the tariff war really kicked off, she was really offside with most premiers in Canada in terms of how she wanted to approach Trump and the US, and went down to Mar-a-Lago and was criticized in many quarters for that, for seeming to be offside with where the Prime Minister was. And this year she also, you know, she had a high-profile success at the end with the MOU, but there were also things that did not go so well for her. So she was doing sort of domestically in Alberta a lot of pretty heavy-handed things with legislation, including the notwithstanding clause on health care for trans kids that received a lot of blowback, attempted book censorship that got blowback and was eventually walked back, and capped it all off by using the notwithstanding clause for the first time in Canadian history to put an end to a labor dispute. So those are all decisions, I think, that will continue to have consequences over the next few years and as her term continues. But she has made a real calculation and a real political risk in doing this MOU with Carney, because her base, who has often been the driving force behind some of these less popular moves, doesn't like it. And so she is really torn between, I think, those two types of pressures in her decision making.
Well, and Charelle, this is where she is. I don't know if she's a reluctant or an enthusiastic culture warrior, but she doesn't flinch from those issues, and she's willing to use the notwithstanding clause and the legislature to get what she wants in those arenas.
Yeah, it kind of seems like she's willing to use, she's going to take advantage of anything that comes her way, whether it's, you know, a crisis, whether it's a win, she's going to use it, she's going to put herself forward. You know, the fights that she's been having, whether it's with the federal government, whether it's with Premier Eby in BC, these are all things that she can still say, I am fighting for you, ultimately. And that's what people want to see from their politicians. And she's, for the most part, doing that still very successfully, even if some of the very people that she's fighting against are the very people who live in her province and are counting on her to, you know, lead the government and not make their lives worse. In some cases, that might be the case.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely certain she's going to be a main character in Canadian politics in 2026. Okay, don't go away. Up next, who we've ranked as the third biggest political newsmaker of 2025. Welcome back to this special holiday edition of Power and Politics. And today we're taking you through the top 5 newsmakers that dominated politics in 2025. So far, we have Ontario Premier Doug Ford at number 5 and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith at number 4. And now for our number 3 newsmaker this year.
If we had a carbon tax election now, we could elect a strong, stable, national majority government. I'm firm in my convictions, and I'll always put Canada first. Change is on the way. A promise that hard work gets you a great life on a safe street. All right, everyone, get out to vote for a change. To the millions of people who voted for the Conservative Party and put their hopes and dreams in our vision, thank you.
But if you told me that we would get 41% of the vote and still not win, I would have said, you're crazy.
I'm meeting a lot of people who are very angry about the way that the federal government has abused and mistreated Alberta. Thank you very much to the great people of Battle River Crowfoot.
Please forgive me for my late arrival to this session.
We'll obviously hold the government to account. More tariffs and rising tariffs.
More big promises without any action.
Where are Mark Carney's elbows these days?
Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead and be the only leader in the country that's fighting for an affordable Canada.
Number 3 goes to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. The special holiday edition of the Power Panel is back with Tim Powers, Jordan Leichnitz, Charelle Evelyn, and Laura D'Angelo. Laura, I think Pierre Poilievre probably started the year thinking he might be number 1 on a list like this, number 3, and making news in ways I don't think he's happy to be making news.
No, I think Pierre Poilievre probably had one of the worst years of his life in 2025. To think that we were all sitting here a year ago talking about, what was likely going to be Prime Minister Poilievre and what that government would look like. They were, truly, it seemed like they were measuring the drapes. To go from that to he now can barely break a message through. He's lost 2 MPs to the Liberals, another one who refuses to vote with them and will leave in the spring. And everyone's just on watch to see who's going to cross the floor next. It's remarkable the year he's had. And in addition, he went from not only likely being the Prime Minister, he was driving the national narrative and the federal government's direction for at least a year before that. And now he's really a non-entity. It is remarkable to be on the list, number 3 on the list for, at this point, no longer making news.
Yeah, Charelle, Greg McEachern said they went from measuring the drapes in the Prime Minister's office to hiding behind the drapes on budget day so they didn't accidentally cause an election. It's just such a dramatic shift from where he was when Chrystia Freeland resigned from the Trudeau cabinet.
Yeah, and the thing that's, I think, is the most remarkable about it is how little growth we've seen in that year. I mean, after he lost his seat in April, he said he was going around, he was talking to people. We heard that he was having conversations with everybody. He was talking to people he had previously ostracized and shunned, people like, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who he had never bothered to speak with or deigned to speak to before. To kind of get a sense of what am I doing wrong? What do I need to do better? And then that, as soon as he kind of got his seat back in August after the by-election, that kind of all went away. And he said, no, I'm doing the right thing. Everybody's telling me to keep going, to keep doing what you're doing, and everything will be okay because this is what the people want. I don't quite know if right now this is what the people want. Yes, the parties are polling pretty much at a statistical tie, but Pierre Poilievre's personal numbers are so far below Mark Carney's that if he decided to call the election that Pierre Poilievre says he should be having instead of poaching his MPs, if he wants a majority, I don't know if he would get the result that he thinks that he would be getting.
Tim, he ended 2024 as the main character in Canadian politics, defining and setting the agenda and the issue set, and he was the inevitable next Prime Minister. And he ends 2025 with deep questions about his own leadership, right? Lost an election, lost a seat, losing MPs to defection. It is a remarkable decline in a year.
There's a great quote by Donald Crichton, the Canadian historian, who says, history is about character and circumstance. On the circumstance side, Poilievre created circumstances in many ways that he thought would benefit him, but led to the circumstance he finds himself in. The takeout of Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, with Mr. Singh being so low and the NDP polling so low, there was no opportunity for the NDP to cut in and take some of Mark Carney's vote, and the circumstance of pulverizing Justin Trudeau so effectively that he had no game plan for who came next. And the character is the most fascinating one. Beloved by many in the Conservative Party and Conservative voters, not so with the broader public, and still struggling to find a way, as Laura said, to break through beyond what people know him for, the strong message track, the pugilism that plays so well with the people who like him, but doesn't score with those who don't. As we go into 2026, David, there is a real possibility that Pierre Poilievre, yes, can rise like a phoenix, or perhaps by the time we hit 2027, he is no longer leader of the Conservatives. That we would have not foreseen a year ago.
I mean, Jordan, he's in this remarkable political situation in that he has unquestionably raised the floor for the National Conservative Party, but maybe also lowered its ceiling. And that he's brought in so many people who will be there to the end and so many others who will never be there until he's gone.
Yeah, that's right. He's got such a challenge in holding together the vote coalition that he would need to get over the top. And that's in part because of, as Tim said, his 2024 self was a little bit too effective in terms of really destroying Justin Trudeau and his credibility as leader, making a conscious decision to go after Jagmeet Singh as leader of the NDP to push down the NDP's numbers. All of that set the table for a very different fight this election. And it was a fight in the end that Poilievre was not prepared for and was unable to adapt to as the ground shifted underneath him. And Trump and tariffs became the leading point of concern for Canadians. And he faced a new opponent in the Liberals with Mark Carney, who had a very different skill set. And Poilievre never really changed how he was approaching strategically that election. And I think that, well, it's clear that it did yield historically high results for the Conservatives in terms of their popular vote. The problem is, as you say, it's very limiting with the next group of voters that they would need to reach out to if they want to be able to win decisively. If they want to have a majority government in Canada, they need to win bigger among groups of voters who actually right now are forming an even more negative opinion of Pierre Poilievre than they were the day of the election. And I think that what we've seen in the months since is somebody who's struggling to find their footing and who has been resistant to take lessons from the campaign, be they communications lessons or strategic lessons. It's not that they aren't attempting change, and you can see the Conservatives have brought in a new campaign director, they brought in new communications staff, but the leader himself, Pierre Poilievre himself, has not shifted how he's speaking to Canadians and what he's talking about. And so that for him, the question of whether he has the capacity to make a change in that, I think will continue to dog him next year.
Right, and Charelle, I guess this is the big question for Pierre Poilievre in 2026. Can he change? Should he change? Is he capable of change? And does he want to change? Because it doesn't seem there is a real desire and willingness to be a different type of politician, because this is who he has been his whole life.
He's been his whole life. He's on record as saying, he's never changed his mind, and that's something that he's essentially is proud of. And we keep hearing him say he doesn't need to reflect on his leadership. It's the Liberals' fault that things are going kind of as poorly as they are for the Conservatives. And I don't know if we will see, people fundamentally have shown that what they seem to have liked was the message. They liked Pierre Poilievre's message on affordability, cost of living, all of these things. They didn't like the messenger. And so they went with Mark Carney, who was essentially serving them, to a degree, some of the same message, but without all the baggage that came along with Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, the country clearly wanted change. He was the vehicle for change. And when another vehicle pulled up, he couldn't change and lost it. All right, don't go away. Up next, who we've ranked as the second biggest political newsmaker in Canada of 2025. Welcome back to this special holiday edition of Power and Politics. Today, we're taking you through our top 5 newsmakers of 2025. So far, we have Ontario Premier Doug Ford at number 5, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith at number 4, and federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre at number 3. So let's find out who ranked as number 2.
I would love to see Canada be the 51st state. We're going to put very serious tariffs on Mexico and Canada when the drugs that are coming through are at record numbers.
We're going to put a lot of tariffs on steel. Canada's been very bad to us on trade. We have all the cards. We have every single one. Canada's going to have to start paying up. Economically, we have such power over Canada.
Is there anything he could say to you in the course of your meetings with him today that would get you to lift tariffs on Canada?
No. We have different concepts. I have a tariff concept. Mark has a different concept. We're going to stop all negotiations with Canada right now until they straighten out their act.
We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariff.
What's holding things up? If he's a great man and you want to do a deal with Canada, why aren't you?
Because I want to be a great man too.
Well, no surprise, Donald Trump is on the list. We're ranking U.S. President Donald Trump as the second biggest political newsmaker of 2025. Special holiday edition of the Power Panelists back with Tim Powers, Jordan Leichnitz, Charelle Evelyn, and Laura D'Angelo. And Jordan, there's an argument you can make that he should be number one. Guess who number one's going to be, folks? But, I mean, what is left to say about Donald Trump at the end of 2025 other than he's always there and he's one of the two main characters in Canadian politics?
Yeah, he continues to be a chaos machine, and that has shaped our political scene this year. And if you think over the last year, what are the things that might not have happened if it weren't for Donald Trump? We probably would not have another Liberal government. We certainly wouldn't be spending 2% of our GDP on defense. We wouldn't be going around the world looking for new trading partners. We would not have an MOU with Alberta for potentially a pipeline to the West Coast. The list goes on. Really, Trump is the actor that has been the instigator of some really serious and significant and very long-term shifts in Canadian politics this year. And more deeply, I would say, I think that Trump this year has fundamentally changed the relationship between Canadians and Americans, probably irrevocably. And the tariff war is one part of that, and Canadians certainly felt the economic threat and are now feeling the economic impacts with job losses, as we saw, just this month, for example, in Sault Ste. Marie and other places. But also, the 51st state rhetoric changed something really significant in terms of trust between the two countries. When our defense and security cooperation has been so deeply integrated over the years, to now have our very closest ally and neighbor talk seriously about annexation is something that Canadians are never going to forget. And you can see that in how Canadians are choosing to spend their money, where they're choosing not to travel, that they're not going to the United States. And I think we can expect that to continue over the next year.
Yeah, and Tim, like geopolitically, it changed how you look at the superpowers because they will turn around and bully you when they can. So the middle powers are kind of coming together, embracing multilateralism. And all of the stuff that Jordan just outlined, he has been president for less than a year. There are more than 1,100 days left in his presidency.
Yeah, and it's a damn shame we still can't get California wine to deal with all of this, David, though that is changing depending what province you're in. I can't think of an American president who's been this dominant in our lifetime and had so much influence on just about every aspect of Canadian life. And it is worrisome. What is equally worrisome is the unfettered, ongoing, hateful, disturbing messages that come from his pulpit. I mean, only we're talking days after the American actor and director Rob Reiner died, and here there was a time when we looked at leaders, and in difficult circumstances we wanted thought and judiciousness, and that isn't there. So not just for us, but for the world, having an American president who is as careless as Donald Trump is very concerning. Bringing it back to Canada, what worries me, and again, from where you and I are from, there are so many decades, if not hundreds of years of history between the people underneath the government that is strong and has made huge differences in difficult times for each other. I hope his presidency doesn't undermine that, but it threatens it to a degree.
Yeah, Charelle, he divides countries and people kind of into good and bad, largely based on how they feel about him or he feels about them, not necessarily on the quality of their actions. But it has fundamentally changed world politics, world economics, and Canadian politics, and it may only be getting started.
Yeah, I mean, he also divides people, not just how they feel about him, but just generally how they look.
Yes.
What he thinks their background might be. You know, all of those things, and those are the types of things that I think that Tim was also alluding to. Is that when it comes to Canada, and like at what point, because the ties between our two countries are so deep and they are so tightly tied, economically, socially, culturally, that Canadians, or rather the Canadian government, has to kind of seemingly turn a bit of a blind eye to some of the things that are happening south of the border, whether it's, you know, the president sticking soldiers on his own citizens, you know, blowing up boats in Venezuela, all of these things. And then because we need to protect our economy, our people, our workers from retaliation, everybody now has to pretend that it isn't as bad as it is. And those are the types of things that I do wonder if, you know, in the years to come, because he said this presidency, we're only a year into it, less than a year
not
into
even.
it, for the next few years, and for whomever comes after Donald Trump, because this isn't going to end, if he leaves office, this isn't going to end with him. Is that going to have to continue on? That turning a blind eye, putting the blinders on, saying, okay, well, we're focused on economics, we're focused on trade, we're focused on this, and everything else that's going on, where Canada was once looked at to be, you know, kind of a bit of a moral arbiter, now we just have to pretend that we can't see what's in front of our faces.
Yeah, well, you see it, Laura, but you kind of are limited in the action you can take because of the harm it could bring back, right? When you live in the suburbs of the modern Roman Empire, you kind of, you have to pay attention and be wary of what the Caesar is doing.
Yeah, you have to be so careful. And what all of this highlights is just the true fundamental shift that Donald Trump has evoked worldwide, and certainly in Canada, because everything in Canada for the past year has been in contrast to Donald Trump or in relationship with that. And that doesn't change anytime soon, certainly not in the next 3 years. But 3 years is a long time, and that is a long time to get into the psyche of Canadians. That 51st state comment and then rhetoric that continued, that has fundamentally shifted how Canadians feel. There's the deep history that Tim talks about, but there's also modern history. Many Canadians, a huge percentage, have family living in the US. People flow back and forth across the border. And that kind of rhetoric all of the sudden changes the way people feel about their own family, changes the way people feel about how governments interact. It changes the way people feel about how they're going to live their day-to-day lives. And that is the type of shift that politicians then have to react to. That's the type of shift that Mark Carney then has to change the way a government governs, change the way politics happens in Canada, because it's always going to be in relation to Donald Trump and the sequence of history that he's set off.
You know, and Tim, just a final point, like I think people in my profession, we forgot just how disruptive he is when he's in office. Because like from term 1 to term 2, there was COVID and everything in the middle. And like that took over your thought process and you forgot it. And it's back and it's at a whole different evolutionary level.
And he's exceptionally skillful at it. If he has political skills, it's disruption. But the problem with his disruption, it's for what sake? What is the purpose? While he says a lot of things, his actions are incongruent. And that's frightening. At least you often know with a leader, with a country, where they're going, and you can address it. I wouldn't want to be Mark Carney or Dominic LeBarre trying to negotiate with the United States as we try and determine our future, because it changes on a dime. It changes by a Truth Social post.
Yeah, his media manipulation. He's probably done more mass media than anyone in human history, going back to his newspaper days as a real estate tycoon and stuff in New York, and then reality TV, and now this. All right, don't go away. Up next, who we have ranked as the top biggest political newsmaker of 2025. One guess who it is. Welcome back to this special holiday edition of Power and Politics. Today we're taking you through the top 5 political newsmakers that dominated Canadian politics in 2025. So far we have Ontario Premier Doug Ford at number 5, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith at number 4. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre checks in at number 3, and U.S. President Donald Trump is at number 2. And now, the number 1 political newsmaker of 2025.
I'm back home in Edmonton to declare my candidacy for leader of the Liberal Party. We can put this economy back on track.
Time to win!
Who's ready? Pierre Poilievre. Le roi Charles III The transition between the Prime Minister and myself, that transition will be seamless. I know we need change. Big change. This is the most consequential vote of our lifetimes. I'm asking for your vote to stand up to Donald Trump.
Canada's next government will be a Liberal government.
This is Canada, and we decide what happens here. May I first thank my constituents from Nepean for giving me the honor of being here. Our government will deliver its mandate for change. I'm in politics to do big things, not to be something. It's a rupture, not a transition. We have to get moving on these major projects. Part of the reason why we don't have a deal is that deal is not yet on the table. Canada's government is focused on what we can control. It will take some sacrifices, and it will take some time. We've put forward to the House a plan that meets the moment. I salute the 170 members of the House who supported it. Best deal in the world, strongest budget in the world, and the most new trade deals. This is Canada working.
In the number one spot, Mark Carney, who started the year as a former central banker and ends it as the current Prime Minister. The special holiday edition of the Power Panel is back with Tim Powers, Jordan Leichnitz, Charelle Evelyn, and Laura D'Angelo. Laura, a year ago, we thought Mark Carney might be the next Liberal finance minister. I don't think he's ever going to get that job, but what a year he's had.
No kidding. What a year all Liberals have had, right? Politics is, there's all the strategy around politics, but politics is so much a mix of the right time and a little bit of luck. And Mark Carney had that in spades this year, right? When you think about where the Liberal Party was last year and you think about what we were facing, it is very, very different world right now. And it's super interesting when you start to talk about what Mark Carney is trying to do and what he's looking at in Canada. There's the day-to-day rhetoric that we talk about when we think about Mark Carney. Is he a conservative? Is he right of center? Is he actually just a true centrist? Mark Carney, when you hear that clip, I want to build big things. I'm here to do big things. That is certainly true. He is very much a betting man. It doesn't mean they're all going to happen, but he is betting on these big things. And he is betting a lot on them. He's betting right now his political legacy. And he's not afraid to, it seems like, bet his cabinet on it, right? Bet a Liberal base on it. There are a lot in Liberal base who are not super happy with what's happening right now. But Mark Carney is continuing on down this path and frankly seems to have public opinion on his side. He was the right person at the right moment, and it seems to work when we, to our earlier point, everything is in contrast to Donald Trump, and he truly seems like the antithesis to Donald Trump, even if there's no deal yet.
Yeah, no, Tim, there's certainly a sense of mission to how he approaches the job. And as we're recording this, the CBC decision desk is standing by to see if we're going to have to declare a Liberal majority, because he's also trying to build a larger caucus by poaching Conservatives. What are your thoughts on Mark Carney's year?
Well, it's just fascinating. I remember a year ago, the World Junior Hockey Championships were here in Ottawa, and he and I ended up together at the game. And he politely asked me, well, this was after Chrystia Freeland resigned and the Prime Minister of the day was still there. And he said, do you think I should go for it? And I looked at him and said, you'd be cracked. It's good he didn't take my advice, I guess, for him.
That's why you advise Conservative parties.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And lo and behold, what's fascinating for me, and we've all seen this, there have been lots of people who have been seen to be a political savior. For years in the Liberal Party was Frank McKenna, who, a wonderful man, Mr. McKenna, former Premier of New Brunswick, he was going to come and save the Liberals, and he made different choices. And the Conservatives, another New Brunswicker, Bernard Lord, there were others, Doug Ford. Rarely do you see somebody anointed as the savior come forward and actually become a political savior. The Liberal Party owes a lot to Mark Carney. Laura rightly speaks to how circumstances, again, character and circumstances, have worked for him. But it is kind of bizarre that somebody with no political experience, who didn't know the political world, has come in and now is the Canadian Prime Minister on the cusp of a majority. The one thing I would say that perhaps makes him appealing to many Canadians is what he said in one of those clips. I think he actually isn't here for a long time to collect 3 majority wins. He wants to do things, because that very night we had that conversation when I told him he was cracked. He said, well, I have this public service burn in me that I got to do it. And I think that wasn't just Carney being cute, I think that's legitimate, and we're seeing aspects of that tonight.
Well, there's a much more lucrative and easier life out there for him, Jordan, than this being prime minister at this particular time. But he bought the dip, right, when the Liberals are at their low point, and here they are on the cusp of a majority as we speak.
That's right. And I think that although he's new to politics, he's actually shown acumen over the last year, not just being the right person in the right place at the right time, but he has navigated these waters with Trump, which are so chaotic and unpredictable, skillfully. And I think it's fascinating because what we've begun to see as the year has gone on, and what we will see more of in the next year, is what kind of Prime Minister Carney is going to be. Once the trade war is sort of a little less in the headlines, how is he actually going to govern? And I think we see somebody who is really still presenting themselves as almost the anti-politician. He's there, he's the CEO, he's a deal maker, he's far more transactional, for example, in how he deals with political opponents, with the premiers. And you see the outcome of that. That's things like the MOU with Alberta, an unexpected coup for the federal government. And then, you know, there are also things that he's doing that I would say past prime ministers would not have dared to do. So what you saw him do with C5 in terms of overriding all types of environmental legislation in order to get projects through. Massive increases in defense spending that he didn't run on. Huge cuts to the public service projected. All of these are things that previous Liberal governments would have never dreamed of doing. And even I would argue that previous Conservative governments, such as the one under Prime Minister Harper, would have struggled to get done. And so now you see, as he's beginning to put together a majority government with Conservative MPs, somebody who's positioning themselves as a pragmatist and far more in the spirit, I would argue, of progressive conservatism in Canada, and really taking up that space and making things very difficult for the Conservatives as their political opponent to find any way into those conversations.
Yeah, I don't know where you categorize Donald Trump, but he is a Republican. You could argue the top 5 lists are all conservative in some way or another for this year, right? And Charelle, like whatever people may think of Carney's agenda, it seems that he is clearly something he believes this is what I'm here to do. Like I go back to that mission government approach. It's not about what's popular and micro-targeting. It's like, this is what we need to do. We're just going to do it.
Yeah, he comes back to that that phrasing about having that laser focus on the economy and wanting to do things that he feels are the correct path for the country at this moment in time, and kind of damn the consequences, whether that's politically or socially or all those other things. And it is an interesting time simply because we've coming off of the years under Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, who was very much wanting to move things forward in a progressive agenda forward in certain areas, and we saw quite a bit of a backlash to that. So people saying, "Oh, we don't want this woke politics," and so on and so forth. So now those same people who kind of got that bit of a lift from the Trudeau government, putting that spotlight on issues where diversity, equity, inclusion, all of those types of things, childcare, women in the workforce, feminism, et cetera, those are now all being clawed back if they're not being clawed back, they're being told, well, that's not our priority. We're still going to do it, but it's going to be done in the shadows because
de-emphasized.
It's de-emphasized. Yeah. We want to be focused on the economy. And at the same, and there are plenty of people who are very happy about that, but there's also people who aren't, super keen. And yes, we are seeing that the Prime Minister has some political acumen for never having held, an elective office before, but he is running into those issues where his private sector background is clashing with what needs to be done in a political sphere, whether that's, caucus management, consultation with Indigenous peoples, all of these things. Those are going to be things I think he's going to keep running into again and again and again. Conversations with women, he keeps butting heads with female reporters. Those are the types of things that could chip away at his ultimate popularity.
Yeah, in business terms, Laura, there's a lot of activist shareholders in politics, right? You don't just get to say, that's it, the decision is final, because democracy doesn't quite work that way. But, as Charelle and Jordan have pointed out, you add climate to the list of things that have been de-emphasized or rolled back. This is the thin ice, potentially, of the Carney approach to things, certainly not necessarily within the caucus, though to some degree, but within constituencies and Quebec, Lower Mainland BC. This is where some risk could appear.
certainly a lot of risk could appear there. And I do think that's where you have to come back to his statement, I came here to do big things, not be something. Because if he came to be something, that would always be in the back of his mind, right? What seats could I lose?
Yep.
What part of the base am I going to alienate? What happens to caucus relations? If you came to do big things, if your focus is, I know what's right for Canada, I believe this is the path, you're less focused on that, right? You're thinking there's a different way to do it, or I'm going to get the train going down the tracks and you won't be able to stop it in 4 years. And that seems to be his approach. I say it a lot, but he's very obviously a betting man. And he's betting really big, particularly on the things he's put forward this fall, the budget, the MOU. Those are really big bets. C5, to Jordan's point, those are massive, massive things that he is betting on. And right now, caucus is not, with the exception of Stephen Guilbeault, it seems like, caucus is not really going to move against him. They still owe him their jobs, right? They owe him those big roles. Canadians are giving him a lot of grace at this point, and that's going to continue for a little while longer.
You know what on the caucus, if you actually gross it by one, they'll owe him a lot more because they're going to be paid for 4 years, probably. Yeah. And I wouldn't discount that as something he's thinking about in terms of caucus management. If I bring somebody over, get some stability, then I've got that under control.
Well, he has the benefit of the core value of the Liberal caucus being survival. So, that helps in moments like this. I want to thank you all for joining me for this special holiday edition of the Power Panel. Tim Powers, Jordan Leichnitz, Charelle Evelyn, and Laura D'Angelo. I am David Cochrane. Thank you all for watching the special holiday edition of Power and Politics. Merry Christmas, everyone.